There was no funeral for it. No one brought flowers. No one asked how you were doing. In that specific careful tone people use when they know something significant has been lost. No one gave you permission to grieve it because no one around you recognized it as a loss in the first place. It did not have the visible markers of a loss, not a death, not a divorce, not a diagnosis, not the kind of ending that comes with social acknowledgement and a prescribed period of mourning and people checking in at intervals to see how you are holding up. What you lost was quieter than any of those things, and in some ways that quiet made it heavier rather than lighter because the weight had nowhere to go. The friendship that did not end, dramatically but simply, faded over the course of a year, until one day you realized you had not spoken in months and you could not identify the moment it became over. The version of yourself that existed before something changed you, not a trauma necessarily, sometimes just time, sometimes just the accumulated pressure of becoming what life required and losing in that process the specific quality of yourself that you had never thought to value until it was gone. The dream you never fully admitted to having because admitting it would have made the not having it more painful. So you managed it at a distance, kept it unvoiced, and now grieve it in the specific muted way of someone mourning a death they were not, officially close enough to the deceased to be given a seat at the funeral. This is the grief that Jung studied with the most sustained attention of his career, not because it was the most dramatic form of human suffering, but because it was the most common and the most unaddressed. He called it the grief of the unlived life, and he believed it was responsible for more human suffering than almost any other psychological condition, precisely because it was the condition that went most consistently unnamed. The reason this grief is so difficult to carry is not its weight. It is its invisibility. When something ends visibly, the world adjusts around the ending. There is a before and an after, and the transition between them is marked. Other people register it. The social structure around you accommodates it, however imperfectly. You are given the crude but functional tools of the recognized grief process, the acknowledgement that something has been lost, the permission to feel the loss, the expectation that you will move through something rather than simply around it. When something ends invisibly, none of those tools are available. The friendship did not end. It just became something you could not fully name. The version of yourself did not die. It simply stopped being available, gradually without announcement. The dream did not fail. You simply stopped allowing yourself to hold it as a real possibility, quietly over time, in the small daily decisions that accumulate into a life. And because there was no ending, there is no grief process. There is only the specific, persistent, low-level ache of something missing that you cannot justify mourning because nothing technically happened. Jung observed this in patients whose suffering made no logical sense against the backdrop of their lives. They were functional. They were sometimes successful. They had relationships and work and the ordinary evidence of a life in motion. And they felt underneath all of it a grief that had no object and therefore no resolution. He understood that the absence of a visible object did not mean the absence of a real loss. It meant the loss had occurred at a level the conscious mind had not been given permission to fully register. The loss was real. The grief was real. The invisibility of both was the wound inside the wound. Jung identified the specific mechanism that produces this kind of grief with a precision that most people find uncomfortable the first time they encounter it. He said that the unlived life does not disappear. It does not accept being quietly set aside. It accumulates in the unconscious with the specific weight of everything, and it presses upward through the cracks in the ordinary life, in the specific restlessness that arrives at random, in the disproportionate response to minor losses that are actually triggering the unprocessed major ones, in the recurring dream that SSC returns with the quality of something that has not finished being said. You have felt this pressing, not always dramatically, sometimes just as a vague sense in the middle of an ordinary afternoon that something is missing that you cannot name, sometimes as the specific sadness that arrives when you are doing something pleasant and there is no reason for the sadness and you feel guilty for it on top of feeling it, sometimes as the recognition in a conversation about someone else's life that contains what yours does not, that what you feel is not exactly envy but something adjacent to it, the specific grief of seeing the unlived possibility existing in someone else's life. The pressing is not the psyche punishing you. The pressing is the psyche trying to bring the ungrieved loss into conscious awareness so that the grieving can begin. Because what has not been grieved continues to operate as an unresolved claim on your energy, not constantly, but in the moments that require your full presence, in the relationships that require genuine engagement, in the creative and connective and vital demands of your actual life. But the unresolved grief is there, quietly drawing from the same reservoir, leaving you with less than you have and less than you know you should. There is a specific quality to this grief that distinguishes it from the grief of visible losses, and that most people who carry it have never had named for them directly. It has a self-questioning quality that standard grief does not have. When something ends visibly, the legitimacy of the grief is socially established. You are allowed to be sad about a death. The grief is proportionate to the loss, and the proportionality is confirmed by the people around you. When the loss is invisible, the grief carries no such confirmation. Every time it surfaces, you find yourself performing an assessment of whether the feeling is justified, whether you are being dramatic, whether the thing you are grieving was real enough, important enough, unambiguously lost enough to warrant the feeling that accompanies the thought of it. And this assessment is exhausting, and it is usually conducted by the inner critic, which means it is almost never resolved in your favor. The critic finds the grief excessive, finds the loss too small or too ambiguous, or too much of your own making to support this much feeling, and so you manage it down. You edit it before it can be fully felt. And the managed version never completes itself. The grief that is not allowed to be fully felt cannot be fully processed, and the grief that is not fully processed does not leave. It returns in the same place, with the same quality of something unfinished, until it is given what all grief ultimately requires, and full acknowledgement of the reality of the loss, without the qualifier that it was not real enough to matter this much. The first thing that begins to address this grief is the act of naming the loss precisely, not in general terms, in the specific terms of what actually happened and what it actually cost. The friendship that faded was real. You lost daily access to someone who understood a specific part of you. That understanding is gone now, and the part of you it understood has been less expressed since, because there is no longer someone available to receive it. That is a specific loss. Name it like that. Not the friendship ended, but what the friendship was and what it specifically provided, and what is now specifically absent in its absence. The version of yourself that was lost. Name what it could do that the current version cannot. What it felt like. What it produced in the world around it. What the people who encountered it received from it that they no longer receive. The dream, name it. Say it out loud. Not to commit to it or to brief it into a plan, but to remove it from the category of things too fragile, to acknowledge and place it in the category of things that were real enough to be lost. Jung called this the work of making the unconscious loss conscious. It is not dramatic. It does not require a ceremony. It requires the specific act of honest naming, done privately or with one trusted person. That brings the invisible loss into the same register as the visible ones. This act does not resolve the grief. It gives it a location. And grief that has a location can be processed in a way that grief without a location cannot. The second thing is to grieve it without requiring it to have a resolution. This is the part that most people in Western culture specifically struggle with, because the cultural framework for grief is structured around resolution. You grieve, and then you are through the grief, and then you are healed and ready to move forward. This structure works for some losses. It does not work for the grief of the unlived life, because the unlived life does not have a discrete ending point that the grieving can organize itself around. The friendship did not end on a specific date. The version of yourself did not die at a specific moment. The dream was not definitively abandoned on a Tuesday afternoon. The loss was gradual, and therefore the grief is diffuse, and therefore the resolution cannot come through a single clearing, but only through the sustained practice of allowing the feeling to be present without requiring it to conclude. This is uncomfortable. The cultural framework tells you that if you are still grieving something, you should be over. You are stuck. Jung's framework says something different. He says grief that has no recognized ending point requires a different relationship with the feeling, not moving through it, but learning to carry it with acknowledgement rather than suppression. There is a version of carrying grief that is active and alive and does not prevent full engagement with the present life. It is the version where the loss is known and named and honored as real without being required to resolve into something more comfortable. possible. That version requires the specific courage of a person who is willing to feel what they feel without the reassurance that the feeling will eventually stop. The third thing is to identify what the unnamed grief is protecting. This is Jung's most important contribution to the understanding of this specific kind of loss. He observed that unresolved grief almost always functions as a preservation mechanism. The grief keeps the lost thing present in a way that the acknowledgement of its loss would remove. As long as you are still grieving the friendship is still in some way alive, still present in the emotional life, if not in the lived one. As long as you are still grieving the version of yourself, that version is still available as a possibility in the future, even though it has been absent in the present. As long as you are still grieving the dream without naming it fully, the dream cannot be definitively lost because it has never been definitively addressed. The grief is painful, and it is also underneath the pain a form of loyalty, a refusal to let go of the thing before it has been properly honored. And this means the grief will not resolve until the thing has been properly honored, not mourned into oblivion, honored, acknowledged as having been real, having mattered, having left a mark that the present life carries even in the absence of the thing itself. When the friendship is honored, when you allow yourself to fully acknowledge what it was and what it gave you and what its absence means, grief does not disappear, but it changes quality. It becomes the grief of something real that is really gone, which is cleaner and more processable than the grief of something real that has never been allowed to be real enough to be really gone. The honoring is the beginning of the ending. Not an ending that removes the feeling, but an ending that changes its function from preservation to integration, from the grief that keeps the thing present in order not to lose it, to the grief that allows the thing to be finally, really honorably lost. Jung said the grief of the unlived. Life is humanity's most common and most unaddressed form of suffering, not because it is the most acute, but because it is the most persistent. It does not resolve on its own. It does not diminish with time in the way that the grief of visible losses eventually diminishes. It accumulates. With every additional year in which the invisible loss remains unnamed and the grief remains unprocessed, the weight increases, not dramatically, gradually, in the way of something that has been added to in small amounts over a long period, until the total is no longer small. You have been carrying something real, something that deserves the specific acknowledgement it has never received. Not from other people. They cannot give it because they do not know the full inventory of what you have lost in the quiet ways that do not show from the outside. From you. The acknowledgement has to come from you to the part of you that has been waiting for it since the loss first occurred and found no occasion to be named. That part is not asking you to fall apart. It is asking you to stop pretending. The loss is small enough that it does not require acknowledgement. It is asking you to say, this was real, and I lost it, and it mattered, and I am allowed to know that. That acknowledgement, given honestly and without the qualifier that you should be past this, is the beginning of the only process that actually addresses the grief of the unlived life. Not healing in the sense of removal, healing in the sense of carrying what is real with full knowledge of its weight rather than with the chronic low-level exhaustion of someone pretending it weighs less than it does.